Alright, so I've taken some time and gone ahead and sharpened up these bevels with all these edges like I showed you in the previous video. So now what I want to do is create some surfaces on here. Okay, now what the surfaces do is allow us to put different colors on different parts of the model. So it's a little bit tricky when you've got a more complex model, but one thing you want to do is surface your model as you go. So in this case, we're going to press M. Okay, so M for Mary, I guess. Instead, material. So M for material on your keyboard. And what you're going to see is polygon set material. And what this does, it allows you to assign a material to a set of polygons. Now, it doesn't mean it gives it texture and color and everything else. It's essentially tagging, saying, okay, well, this section here is going to be gray or blue or red or default or whatever. So in this case, we're going to call this red dye. And just to give it a little bit of color so we know that we've made a surface change, we'll choose red. The diffuse value, how much light it takes from the scene and how shiny it is, can be set in here as well. You can make it a default. And what that means is that every model you make from this point will be named red dye. I typically don't do that. I want default to always say default so I know there's a surface I haven't created. And you can add this to the library. We're not going to do this now, but I'll show you a little bit later when we get to the shading tree. Now, the other thing that's important to know is that when you create materials, it's going to apply to everything in your scene unless something is selected. So in this case, nothing's selected. So when I hit red dye, this whole thing will turn red. Okay. In the shading tab over on the right, you get a material group. And this is basically the core. All the things I'm showing here are the core of working with Modo. So this material group is where all of your materials will live for those selected polygons, for those chosen polygons. Now, what about these holes here, where all the dots are? What are we going to do with those? Well, we're going to select those, and then we're going to give those their own unique surface. Now, in this case, just because I chose red doesn't mean I have to keep that. When I select that material, I can come in and change it to whatever color I like. That initial red color was just to get me going. All right, so now to create the holes in here. Now, what I had showed you earlier was just selecting when I was selecting those areas, because there's a lot of parts within Modo that we can't show everything in one tutorial, but just want to give you a quick overview. If I hold the Shift key and use my up arrow, I expand my selection. So that's a great way to select things. But there's another new way in Modo 901. So I'm going to hold the Shift key, select two polygons on the edge here, press L for loop, and let me turn off that other selection. Let's do it again. Press L for loop. It goes all the way around. Now, typically in the past, you would hold the Shift key and add to the selection, much like I did when we created these circles. But there's another little trick. It's new for 901. Hold Control and Shift at the same time and double click, and Modo will fill in that perimeter. So if I hold the Shift key, I can add now. So select two polygons in a row, press L for loop, Control Shift, double click. And we're going to go Shift key, select two polygons. And basically by selecting two polygons, you're telling Modo this is the direction I want to go. You press L, you select a loop, hold Control and Shift, double click, and you fill in between. So really nice, easy way to select something that could have been much more tedious and complex. So Control Shift, double click. All right, now I'll go ahead and do the others on my own so we don't waste video time. But what we're going to do with these is with this selection, press M for material. Now, the last one we did was red dye. Certainly we can name this red dye, it already is. But instead, we're going to call this white dots. And just to know that we made a change, we'll give this a color. When I click OK, those selected polygons become white, and you see over here on the right, there's now another material group called white dots. I can click a blank area to deselect, and now I've got two materials on that one object. And it's really as simple as that. So as you're building, you're just going to select the polygons you want and say, okay, you're going to be red, you're going to be white, you're the head of the character, you're the eyeball, whatever you're building. Okay. There's a couple little tricks as we move on about let's say we're using fonts and you've got a much more intricate area that you have to create a material for. Sometimes it's better to create a material over the whole thing and then select just the easier parts like the face and rename that. But let's move on to the next video and get some lighting and some shading on here.